That wasn't the question I asked him. Nobody wants to see an escalation. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, our bases, in case they don't realize, our bases have already been attacked. Iran is trying to kill our servicemen and women. We are in this war, whether they like it or not. What is the Prime Minister waiting for?
So President Trump is pretty hilariously going off on British Prime Minister Keir Starmer today after the UK just announced that it will finally, maybe potentially, be joining in this conflict and deploying their military at some point over the span of the next several weeks. Which on the surface sounds like a nice gesture, right? Oh, the UK is coming to help us out. How charitable of our old ally and friend to finally come and join us, until you realize that this conflict or war or whatever you want to call it has been going on for an entire week now. The vast majority of the intensive fighting and warfare is already over. Iran's military has effectively been decapitated. And suddenly, now that that's all done, all the hard work has been completed, now Britain wants to show up. Now they want to say, okay, America, we're here to save the day. What is even the point? Like, at that point, right? Why even show up at all? It is like showing up to a birthday party after the birthday party has already concluded, but you're super late and you say, oh, hey, I'm here. No, at that point, just don't go. At that point, just tell them you're sick.
All right, let's do this. Let's kick some ass.
George, the war is over.
What?
Yeah, it's done.
Get out of here. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh.
Yeah, it's 1981.
It's, oh, wow. Oh, so I'm way late.
Like, that's literally what this is, right? It's just a stupid, performative, empty gesture. Trump is right to make fun of it. But I think it is extremely emblematic of Keir Starmer as a whole. I've in the past equated him to an evil genie. When the British populace says, we want control of the refugee crisis and mass illegal migration, he responds by saying, no problem, we're passing a digital ID act. And the people say, wait, what are you talking about? We said we wanted secure borders and mass deportations. No, trust me, here's digital ID, right? That's what you asked for. This will control illegal migration. That's not what we were saying. Same story here with Trump. Trump says, hey, UK, want to help out your old friend in this conflict? Oh, sure, we can send an aircraft carrier 2 weeks after the fact. Well, no, that's not really helping, right? You understand? But I think it's worth noting, this is coming at a time when Starmer is under immense political pressure from both sides. On one hand, obviously, with the UK being isolated following Brexit, they likely want to push closer to the United States. They certainly don't want to be left behind with their alliance there. And so Starmer from the beginning had to offer some gestures of support towards Trump. And that's a major reason, as we talked about, why he granted America the use of their military bases. But at the same time, he obviously has a far left radical base and a base of literal Islamists that he imported to vote for him in his own country that are on the complete opposite side of this, right? It turns out when you import a bunch of jihadis and Islamic radicals and then you want to back your old pal America in a war against jihadis and Islamic radicals, it doesn't go all that well. So in the end, Starmer here is basically, as usual, being a fence sitter, trying to take the midway option that is just pissing off both sides. Nonetheless, we will tell you all about this story here in today's video again. Why Starmer finally kind of, I guess you could say, caved to America, but at the same time, why this is extremely stupid. So let's get into all of it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We greatly appreciate the support, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And that said, take a listen here to what a joke this new British naval deployment is going to be in the Middle East.
The battles in the Middle East are now drawing a response from London. The UK is preparing one of its 2 aircraft carriers for possible deployment, with the crew ordered to be ready to sail in just 5 days. That move could put the Royal Navy in position in the Mediterranean as Britain looks to protect its forces and interests. Stephanie Bennett is in London with more on that. Stephanie.
Hey, John. Yes, things intensify in the Middle East. You have that British aircraft carrier preparing for potential deployment. And you've also got American B-1 bombers landing at RAF bases here in the UK today and also yesterday. The HMS Prince of Wales is currently in Portsmouth, with UK news outlets suggesting it could sail to the Mediterranean or the Middle East. The crew reportedly has been told, quote, they must be ready to leave in 5 days. Meanwhile, the UK Ministry of Defence says the United States has started using British bases for specific defense operations to prevent Iran firing missiles into the region. Starting last night into today, several American B-1 bombers could be seen landing at RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. In addition, RAF Typhoon and F-35 jets have continued their operations over in Jordan, Qatar and Cyprus and the wider region in defense of British interests and allies, of course. But the UK government has been accused by some of not acting fast enough. It comes after the RAF base in Cyprus was struck by a drone. HMS Dragon will be deployed there, but it won't be ready to leave the UK until next week, they say.
Yeah, see exactly what I'm saying? They're preparing to deploy in the next 5 days. The war could be over in the next 5 days. Iran might already be out of ballistic missiles in the next 5 days, considering they already shot off most of them. Their numbers are dwindling a lot. And the time to deploy and defend not just American bases, but your own British military bases, which were likewise targeted in the region, would have been the day this all began, or likely beforehand, when you saw America building up and amassing an armada in the Middle East, not 2 weeks after the fact, when the whole situation is essentially resolved. I mean, how idiotic is that? But of course, this is something that the opposition within the British Parliament was noting to Keir Starmer for several days now. What on earth are you doing? Why are you just sitting around there, standing there as, again, it's not just about America, whether you want to back them. Your own forces are also under attack in the Middle East, and you're doing nothing about it.
Iran is trying to kill our servicemen and women. He is catching arrows rather than stopping the archer. That's what we're talking about. Why is he asking our allies to do what we should be doing ourselves? We are, I would say to Labour MPs, we are in this war whether they like it or not. What is the Prime Minister waiting for?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me give a little more detail, because for a number of weeks now, we've been pre-deploying our capabilities to the region. In doing so, we've been liaising very closely with the United States, as the House would have expected. Therefore, radar systems were pre-deployed, ground-based air defense was pre-deployed, counter-drone systems were pre-deployed.
Yeah, so as usual, we have Keir Starmer just speaking a bunch of words, but ultimately saying nothing. Turns out he's a total master at this. But we know what's really going on here. We know the real reason why he's been so apprehensive to fully get behind the United States in the way that historically the UK would when America's doing this sort of thing. And that is, of course, because of, ladies and gentlemen, his own voter base and the rampant importation of those voters to a certain country called the UK. These people have been floating over on boats for a very long time now. A lot of Iranian sleeper cells that you could argue have already de facto taken over the country to a large extent. And I think that part was made very clear over the weekend when we had Starmer getting up there on the stage and trying to make it very clear to his Muslim audience, while he's celebrating Ramadan alongside them, that the UK wasn't involved here. We had nothing to do with this. So, on one hand, he tells President Trump, or he tells the Conservative Party of Britain that, hey, we're doing everything we can. We're on our side. Don't worry. And then he goes to the Muslims and says, don't worry, guys. The UK's not super involved. We had nothing to do. You know what that's called, Keir? That's called playing both sides. That's called fence sitting. And ultimately, I think it's the case that arguably both sides can see through your crap here. But yeah, I think it's very clear that's what's going on politically, why he's being so reluctant and he's too late to everything and just so indecisive. This is the reason.
But on Iran, I want to make clear the UK was not involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel, and that remains the case.
Yeah, we see what's going on here, right, folks? Because it's worth remembering that Keir Starmer is not quote unquote anti-war. He was a massive hawk when it came to fighting against Russia in Ukraine. He even offered his own military to serve as the peacekeeping force on Ukraine's border, so it's not about that. It's just a question of why suddenly a totally different feeling towards Iran? What's with this constant political indecisiveness? And when you just look at the crowd, who he's speaking to, what he's saying, it becomes very clear that Keir Starmer is arguably compromised by the Islamic radicals, by the IRGC itself, and that's what's really going on, right? So that's exactly why President Trump is now responding to the indecisive performative stupidity of the Labour Prime Minister here by saying that the United Kingdom, our once great ally, maybe the greatest of them all, is finally giving serious thought. But keep that in mind too, it's not even confirmed, right? Serious thought, just be ready to go by March 13th there, right? To sending 2 carriers to the Middle East. That's okay, Prime Minister Starmer. We don't need them any longer, but we will remember we don't need people that join wars after we've already won. Exactly, right? Coming from President Donald J. Trump. And it's worth noting that the outrage towards Starmer didn't even start there. Earlier, a couple of days ago, while President Trump was meeting with Chancellor Merz of Germany at the White House, he also brought up this issue of the Chagos Islands. This is a former group of island chains in the Indian Ocean that were formerly a part of the British Empire, right, owned by the UK. And in the name of Starmer's decolonialism, leftist politics, basically just tried to hand it over to Mauritius, the island nation that, claims ownership over them or something. And the problem with that, of course, is we have a U.S. military base jointly with the UK on that island. So without consulting Trump or the United States, this leftist idiot just kicked us out of our military base. And of course, we had Trump complaining over the fact that, hey, we're fighting in the Middle East right now. We want to be able to refuel in the Indian Ocean. And obviously we can't. So you can clearly tell this pent up anger and frustration when it comes to Starmer with his complete abandonment of the US-UK alliance and of NATO as a whole has been stemming back for a couple of weeks, if not a couple of years now.
And so has UK. Now, the second one is shocking, but this is not the age of Churchill. I will say the UK has been very, very uncooperative with that stupid island that they have, that they gave away and took a 100-year lease, having to do with perhaps indigenous people claiming the island that never even saw the island before. What's that all about? And they ruin relationships. It's a shame.
So yeah, Trump here clearly starting to get the feeling that the UK is not fulfilling its obligations. And in total fairness to Starmer, I will say he's not acting like the president of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, that we previously spoke about, just publicly decrying the US, talking about how he opposes the war, blah, blah, blah. No, Starmer is giving lip service to the fact that, oh yeah, we're a NATO partner, we'll help you out. You can use military bases, but ultimately I think Trump is seeing through what he's doing, which is, again, he's trying to play games. He's trying to appease his radical Islamist base and Trump in the United States at the same time, and it's really not working. We see through your crap, which is exactly why Nigel Farage, the likely next prime minister of the UK right now, is at Mar-a-Lago meeting with members of the Trump administration tonight and essentially declaring from the inside that very likely it does appear that the working relationship between President Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is effectively over for the reasons he's about to lay out.
He has in his career forgiven people who've turned against him. He doesn't do it quickly, and I see very little prospect of the relationship between Starmer and Trump improving. I mean, even now, the British Prime Minister is calling for a negotiated settlement with the Iranians, provided they promise to give up nuclear weapons. Well, we did all this back in 2015 with the JCPOA deal. So the British Prime Minister is living at least 10 years out of date on everything. No, this relationship with Trump and Starmer is over.
And look, I'm going to say the same thing about Starmer as I said about Pedro Sanchez in Spain. Right now, America is making a significant geopolitical chess move. The smaller powers here in NATO and the Middle East have to pick sides. And those who pick the wrong side or straddle the fence way too much like Starmer are ultimately making a very long-term grave mistake for their country because, as Trump states, yes, America will not forget. They basically are seeing in this moment that the UK is an unreliable ally, which is unfortunate because the UK used to be our most reliable ally. Now, I say that with no animosity towards the people of the UK. I think we all collectively understand your prime minister is a complete idiot. He basically got elected by accident. He's not going to be there very long. But it turns out, unfortunately, the damage that he may have done to the UK politically and geopolitically might stem a lot longer, and the cleanup process there might be a lot more brutal than potentially we would like it to be. You know, I think it's only prolonging what I would call the British identity crisis post-2016, because what happened in 2016? The British people voted in favor of Brexit. They left the European Union, but instead of capitalizing on what that referendum was about, right? Because I would argue it's about what? People wanted to control migration. They were tired of the illegal migrant and refugee crisis that the European Union was forcing down their throats. That was a big reason for Brexit. And then secondly, wanted economic independence, maybe manufacturing to come back to the island, as well as perhaps very likely if you move away economically from the EU, that means you have to move closer to your former empire, right? America included in that. So sort of a new economic relationship with, you know, places Britain used to own. We understand that, right? And yet the idiots in charge, including Starmer, have basically stood still and done none of that, right? And now people are looking at the British economy, they're looking at the refugee crisis of today and saying, Brexit was a failure, it was a mistake. Well, it wasn't a mistake. The mistake was that it wasn't really implemented the way it was intended by the fools that were in charge, which is to say what? Okay, I'm not here to talk about the refugee and migration crisis because it's not relevant to this video, although it kind of is when you consider why Starmer is so reluctant to get involved with America. But again, right? Britain left the European Union. They're isolated now from that continent. Now, what is your kind of bailout plan in that world, right? You have to naturally, if you're going to leave the EU, which you did, move closer to the United States and our part of the world and our hemisphere. Except right now, the UK, because they're, again, like Keir Starmer is, you understand, he's riding the fence, he's sitting still, not doing that, right? See, you leave one end, you have to move to the other end, you're just sitting there in the middle, taking the brunt of both punishments, right? Yeah, it is true. The UK is economically suffering because it left the European Union, not because in its own it couldn't thrive or survive, but because it left the EU and then didn't move toward its natural alternative. And yes, I would argue right now that by failing to build strong political ties to the United States, if it makes sense what I'm saying, right? Starmer is only exacerbating the problem that Britain is facing long term, right? You can't just sit alone. Britain's never prospered just sitting alone. You're going to leave one union, you got to kind of join another one. Oh, no, let's not do that. Let's just stand still. Let's just focus on appeasing our Islamist and Muslim voter base instead of like doing what clearly is in our nation's best interest, and then completely fall behind, basically completely get forgotten on the world stage. Britain, of all places, being forgotten on the world stage. Who could say such a thing? Who would ever imagine even 30 years ago we would be uttering those words? But unfortunately, that's what it's looking like they're doing right now. So, you know, it's an unfortunate development. And as I said, Starmer doesn't understand the damage he's doing by not really seizing on this opportunity to show the United States how reliable of an ally they potentially are, considering, again, the UK, having left Europe, needs a strong relationship with America, right? You understand the chess there? But no, let's not do that. And then let's continue letting in refugees and migrants, even though we left the European Union to stop that. It's ridiculous. But anyways, that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.